And I'd particularly like to welcome Ketan Sheth and Carolyn Downs from who have let us use their beautiful building, the Chief Executive of Brent Council and the Chair of our Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And I will be coming to them in a moment to say a few words. But thank you so much for letting us use your building, and thank you. I have a small number of apologies from Simon Crawford, the Deputy Chief Executive at London North West, Andy Bush, the clinician, and Ned at Imperial and Chelsea and Westminster, AJ and Ned at Chelsea and Westminster and London North West. Professor Des Johnson will be joining virtually and has to step out for a university commitment between 11 and 12, and Vinetta is currently on a plane coming back from Dubai. In fact, she's probably going through immigration at Heathrow, so she, as we speak, so she will appear as soon as she's managed to make herself her way here. And lastly, I need to say farewell to Sue, who is sat in a corner out of my eye line, but there's Sue Smith, who's the Chief People Officer for Chelsea and Westminster Foundation Trust and Hillingdon Hospital Foundation Trust, who leaves on the 27th of this month to go to South London and the Maudsley NHS Foundation Trust. So we'll be sad to lose you, but pleased that you're staying in the NHS family. So thank you for everything that you have done. So the people who've had the joy of going through the pack, I should say, first of all, congratulations and thanks to everybody's got their microphone on. If they could turn it off, that'd be helpful. Kofu and Pritam for the fantastic work that we've done putting this pack together. It's been an enormous amount of work to get here. It's been a team effort, but the two of you have laboured. The first time you do this is always the hardest, and the pack that you have, I think, represents a good picture of what's going on. I'd say we're not quite there yet. I think some of these papers are really good. I think we still need to do a bit of a fine tune on the performance pack, which I suspect is really good if you're a chief operating officer, but a little more information than Ned or the public need. But given this is the first time that we've done this, I think a number of people have said it's 450 pages. I have been dealing with more pages than that from 4 separate board meetings for the past 6 months, including a high point of one, which I think was 950 pages board pack. So as I said at the time, if I could read that fast, I'd be a lot more literate than I am, because I'd have read some really good books. So a really good job of putting this together. So you've also got in this pack some pieces that we won't have to do again. We go through terms of reference for committees and multiple sets of minutes from previous boards and so on coming together. So so I can see the route from here to what will be a reasonably sleek set of papers as we move forward into future meetings. So thank you for everybody who's put that together and writing the papers and bringing the bureaucracy together. So let us kick off by asking whether there are any declarations of interest that people feel the urge to share now on items of the agenda. I don't see any hands raised, so thank you very much. And let us move on to the minutes of the previous provider board meetings. We've got the Chelsea and Westminster Foundation Trust, we've got Imperial College minutes, we've got the London North West minutes, and we have 2 sets of Hillingdon minutes. Peter, I think we're 1 set of minutes short, is that right?
Yes, I think we've the Chelsea and Westminster Foundation Trust had an extraordinary meeting on the 22nd of July to approve the governance model, which we'll come on to in a minute. Those minutes aren't here, but we'll circulate those separately.
Thank you. So we've got 4 regular board meetings and one extra one at Hillingdon because when we were going around approving the setup for this meeting, we were doing it in the second half of the month. So the first 2 board meetings at Chelsea, Westminster and Hillingdon beat us to the availability of the papers. So we did special meetings for those. Are there any significant corrections that anybody wants to make to any of the minutes? If there are any drafting areas, any corrections or punctuation, they can be fed back offline. Very good. We will take those as accepted into the record. And let me turn to our guests, to Carolyn Downs, who is the Chief Executive of Brent Council, and Councillor Ketan Sheth, who is the Chair of the North West London Joint Health Scrutiny Committee and is a good friend of the NHS in North West London, and who I've had the pleasure of working with quite closely over my first 6 months in this chair. So you are both very welcome to this meeting, and we would be in a section that we will be holding routinely on the agenda for stakeholders and patients and staff to tell stories for the board. We would be privileged if you would give us a few minutes thought as on behalf of both Brent Council and more widely the partnership that we have with local authorities. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that, Matthew. Grateful to you. So, friends, really good to see you. And it is a real thrill for me to welcome you all to Brent Civic Centre for your meeting. So most of you will know me, and it won't come as any surprise to you to know how deeply I value our partnerships. So this meeting is very important to me, partly as Brent Councillor and partly as Chair of the North West London JOSC. I say important because this meeting demonstrates a good example of our partnership working at its best in an ever-changing NHS and social care landscape, but with our constant and strong desire to reach out to more residents in better ways for better outcomes. And I say better outcomes because that's what we're here for, right? Supporting one of the most diverse populations across the system. You don't need me to tell you that while we have some great services in North West London, despite the record level of backlog, workforce pressures, financial pressures, but we do also see some of the poorest outcomes in many of our neighborhoods and communities. And that is something we all need to work to address together. For me, partnership is all about working together to genuinely address the unacceptable levels of health inequalities, pulling all the levers for more preventive work, more earlier interventions, and more speedier and safer returns to home. One way that I believe we can progress this agenda is to enable clinicians more frequently to work in neighborhoods and communities. Take, for example, the COVID vaccination program led by Leslie and Pippa with councils, which demonstrated how healthcare professionals taking vaccines to community made a difference to some of our most deprived neighborhoods. Another example is CNWL, where I'm the lead governor, coming to community to support the residents after the Grenfell disaster. We must learn from those examples and continue to challenge how we provide healthcare. So the key learning for me is that extending your collaborative to work much more closely for integration and delegation with community services, mental health services, adult social care, public health. And I know this is all very much part of your thinking. And This is what we in councils do, day in, day out, working in partnership with services, with residents and communities. And of course, we know our residents, and I dare say we are very good at it. Also, there must be a genuine two-way conversation between us, engaging the public in an ongoing dialogue on how services work for them, keeping the NHS accountable to our residents through councils, through scrutiny, and indeed, my own committee, the North West London JOSC. I know health inequalities isn't, of course, all about health. There are also other factors at play: housing, environment, and above all, employment. The NHS in North West London is perhaps the largest employer, and we really must ensure that we are recruiting from within our own neighborhoods and our own communities at every single level, from porters to board. Staff and leadership should reflect our diverse communities. Also, hospitals as large employers need to truly become anchor institutions for education, training, and apprenticeships for our local communities. With my extensive work with universities and colleges across the capital, I know that you are doing some great work already, but much more is needed. It's about joining hands and not dropping them. And as I say, I know you guys are doing a lot of work already, but we need to do a lot more to bring about that tangible difference. Not just the talk, but to walk that talk in partnership with councils at every single step, to benefit every single community in every single neighborhood. So, friends, here's to us working even more closely together for that better outcome. Thank you.
So thanks to Ketan for that. Just to amplify Ketan's points, which obviously I wholeheartedly agree, I thought it would be useful to talk about a couple of examples that we've delivered here in Brent collectively as NHS and the council, and indeed the community and voluntary sector, to actually improve health outcomes. I think it's be no surprise to anyone here to say that the ICS is clearly in its forming stage, or is it forming? Storming? Storming, yeah, apologise, it's definitely storming and has a way to go yet. But I have to say that working at a local level in a joined up way through our ICP, our local borough-based partnership, I think is more positive than it's ever been, and the outcomes and the health outcomes therefore are more positive than it has ever been. And an example of that is through an initiative which we have called Brent Health Matters, which is about taking primary and community healthcare to where people are, rather than expecting people to come to primary and community healthcare. And the diabetes clinics that we have collectively run together as a part of that, we've actually run 19 in the last year of those clinics. And those are in community settings, some in health settings, and some in faith settings. And that approach has come to the point where we have had 2,900 patients in that year coming to those diabetes clinics. 2,417 of those have received health checks, and 70 patients needing urgent mental care were seen, and 77 non-diabetic hyperglycemic patients were identified, and that stopped people from coming into your care. So that is one example of us working collectively where we can have a positive impact on people's health outcomes and indeed patient flow to yourselves. The other issue I would raise is the current round of winter pressures, because I think we're all going to be in the most difficult place that we've been in ever, actually, in relation to winter. And I have to say, I think the start to the allocation of funding from the ICS was not a good one. And excluded social care in the first instance. That has now happily been fully rectified. And the ICS actually are now putting in an additional £5 million over and above what was the case. And I think that is because people like myself and Leslie sit in meetings with other colleagues and are able to talk about the impact on the ground if people don't do things slightly differently. And I think that joint working has been really helpful. And here in Brent, on top of that money, we have specifically put in an additional £1.5 million between health and local government to help that patient flow, and particularly concentrating on helping primary and supporting primary care, and also mental health, which are real blocks to the system as well. So I just thought it would be useful to talk about some really positive things that we've done at the very local level. I wish you all really good luck. I mean, this is a very big meeting. No wonder you needed to come to this building. I think there's more of you as non-executives and executives here than we have as councillors. So good luck to you, Matthew.
Thank you. We said to ourselves, who has really big meetings that would have a room that would fit us? And obviously council's leapt to the forefront. So thank you. Thank you for those words. And obviously around this table, we represent the 4 acute trusts providing acute care. And whilst what we do is really important to us and really important to patients, we are not the whole of healthcare, and we are very committed to the collaboration with through the ICS with our colleagues in primary care and mental health and community services, but also our local relationships with the local authorities are really important to us. And I've joined the chief executives in a number of their regular meetings with local authorities, and I know that all of the trusts invest a lot of time in building those partnerships, and the local authorities invest a lot of time in building those partnerships in return. And I think if we're going to do more than just treat the people who turn up at our door, if we're actually going to try and bend the curve on health inequalities, then we need to replicate what we did during COVID and work with local authorities to find the patient where an intervention will make a difference. And that requires us bringing together our expertise on healthcare and your expertise in your populations in order to do that together. So we're delighted that you're here, and I think it's representative of the enormous work that has gone on across the borough councils and across the trusts to build those relationships over the last few years. So thank you very much indeed. I won't make you sit here through the whole of our meeting unless you really want to, in which case you're very welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks, Ketan. So moving on to the next section of our agenda, when we will take reports, my report as the chair, and then the reports from the 4 chief executives. Good reports. They're available online. I'm hoping people will have read them. So I've asked my colleagues to not read their reports to you, but to add what's necessary. But if I could just touch on my report, and obviously take the opportunity to read it to you, but just to talk about what we've been up to in the last few months. I think the thing that struck me most as I've walked around our organisations, and I try one day every week to get out to a different organisation across the collaborative and go out and meet staff and see clinical areas that are being delivered and talk to staff in the non-clinical services, and is the deep commitment that people have. And people are working under an enormous amount of pressure at the moment, but there is a huge well of effort from people to address the backlog that's come out of COVID, to face up to the enormous challenges and demands that we're seeing. But there is a genuine enthusiasm for for the idea that we could be working more closely together. I was talking to one of our chief physiotherapists who said to me, so does this mean that we should all as chief physiotherapists be talking about creating common guidelines for patients? And I said, yeah, that's exactly what it means. He says, I spend every Saturday afternoon updating our trust guidelines. Maybe we could split the work between the four of us and then just change the email address on the bottom. Yeah, let's go do that. Let's but make care better for patients, but let's also make it an easier way to work. So I think from the most trivial end of giving some of our staff their Saturday afternoons back, through to ensuring that we deliver best practice across the whole of North West London. I feel as though people are up for that, and I've had the great pleasure of visiting. I think I've done 3 sets of annual staff awards. I think the Imperial ones had already happened before I started, but going to the staff awards and seeing the pride that people have in their own organisations, and how much they want to be seen as part of an NHS team doing the best for the public has been very gratifying. You'll find in the pack also the statement of intent for the Acute Provider Collaborative, and I think we've tried to capture that sense of why our staff come to work every day in the statement of intent. If people have got the big pack, I can see Leslie looking confused already, and we're only on page 69. You know, that's all of the boards have discussed this in earlier versions, and we thought that having now landed on 2 sides of A4 to try and capture our vision and key principles, bringing it to our first meeting was a good place for us to just explore it momentarily. And I think it splits into 3 sections. The first is to recognise that we are the Acute Provider Collaborative. We are not the whole of the NHS. And what we do is in the context of working within the North West London Integrated Care System to improve outcomes in population health. And for those people who get excited by the literature, generally, the actual delivery of acute services is about 20% of the contribution to the health of a population. The other 80% is prevention, it's vaccinations, it's air quality, it's housing, it's education, it's all of those things. And if we don't engage in supporting, as Carolyn and Ketan talked about, the role of the NHS also in helping to create jobs, create educational aspiration to help lift our population, we're missing part of the health obligation. Those aren't just nice things to do. They're part of helping create a healthier population. So we will work with the ICS to improve outcomes, prevent ill health, as well as working collaboratively to improve our own productivity and to support the broader economic and social development. And I think that part of us within the wider NHS system needs to be at the core of what we do. And then we have a vision of using our resources to drive continuous improvement, to take out unwarranted variation in what we do. So how do we make sure the best of what we do is what's done everywhere, and create an alliance of organisations to attract and retain excellent staff, to try and make sure that this is the go-to place to work in the NHS. Developing models of care that meet our patients' needs, recognising that we are both community hospitals and very specialist hospitals. And how do we get the balance right between doing something once brilliantly because we can bring efficiency and world-class clinicians to bear on it, and making sure that our services are accessible to people who have difficulty travelling, and for whom a local NHS is really important to them, and be at the leading edge of spreading innovation. So we have that as our vision for where we want to be, and our principles of our collaboration is to make a step change. We think it's time to step forward and step up in in the way in which we deliver services, ensure that we treat everybody fairly and inclusively. Your access to healthcare should be based on your need and not on your postcode. Making sure that we collectively make decisions and are transparent about our information, both with each other, so that we can see what's going on in each other's organisation, and with our local community, so they can see what we do well, what we do less well, and hold us to account. And join up what we do whilst maintaining for independent organisations with a relationship with its local communities, with councils and governors for our two foundation trusts. And so if we can do those things, it will have been worth us coming together. That's our statement of intent, and I'd like to ask the board now to ratify that, recognising that we will evolve it over time. So I see lots of nods around the room. Thank you very much. Excellent. A bit to do then. But I am now going to turn over to our chief executives and invite them to add to their reports and bring their thoughts to the table. And we'll kick off with Leslie, Chelsea and Westminster.
So thank you, Chairman, and I nearly said good afternoon. It feels like afternoon, but good morning, everyone. Really good to see you. So I'm going to take the report as read, but just say a couple of things. So first of all, and I'm sure all my colleagues would say this, which is just to say a very big thank you to all of our staff who are continuing to work incredibly hard during very challenging times. I won't talk about performance here because I'll have an opportunity to do that later. But I just wanted 2 minutes to reflect on actually something that the chairman said, which is actually around this table are individuals who've experience of bringing hospitals together to do things that are better and to improve the care of patients. And actually during COVID, all of us, all of these teams that are around this table worked together in an incredible way, again, to try and sacrifice the personal and organizational egos to allow us to really get to, how do we provide care for patients in a better way? How do we share our resources? How do we share our staff? How do we share our kit? How do we share our buildings? And that's our intention to build on that. And it's why, of course, the executive are very keen to be part of this as well. And that's not to say that we don't have a job to do with building that and socializing that with our communities and our staff. We do. But I just wanted to say that the work that we've done so far together, I think already demonstrates that we're better together working individually. The only other thing I should, I think it is something I should pull out is particularly at Chelsea is the Centre for Gender Surgery, because it is the first trust to be commissioned in this country for the provision of this service. And just to be frank, it hasn't been without controversy. So I just want to make sure that that's out in the public arena. But thanks very much, Chairman.
Perfect, Leslie. Can I turn to Tim here?
I think we are going to say largely the same thing. So I would also like to start by thanking our staff. I mean, I think you'll hear that 4 times. But when I first started the job, my then chair said, "What you've got to remember, Tim, it's a people business," because it absolutely is. We rely on every single one of our staff to come to work each day, and actually the commitment that they show is quite extraordinary. So I think it is just important to acknowledge that. As again, the paper is what it is. I think the things I would just like to highlight, because I think people have done well. That's not to minimise the challenges that we face, but I think there's some particular things I would just like to highlight. So colleagues will remember that we were in a slightly perilous position with regard to our 62-day cancer performance in the summer, where we were teetering on the bottom 20 in the country. I'm really pleased that the team have done I think, really excellent piece of work, and we are now 50th worst, or if you want to be the other way, 20th best. So I think that is so well out of the danger zone. And of course, in one sense, that is good from a sort of NHS table perspective. But of course, actually, what that means is that patients who have cancer are getting treated more quickly, and patients who don't have cancer are being told that they don't have cancer more quickly, all of which is an incredibly important thing. And obviously, we will work hard to continue our ascent up that table. The other things, I guess, that might be sort of slightly pertinent to us, the new hospitals programme. So just to highlight that we've started master planning on Charing Cross and Hammersmith, because obviously they are also in the plan, and we continue to have discussions at a senior level in the NHP about how we can progress Mary's, which, well, I started at the trust in 2000, and there was going to be a rebuild then. So we have taken our time, and I think we do want to bring that to a conclusion. To note the email address, the web address for Paddington Life Sciences. If you've got a spare moment, do please go and look at that. Bob Claber, our Director of Strategy, Research and Innovation, has brought together 9 life sciences companies around the basin to form a partnership, which I think both will be helpful, both from a sort of relationship building and scientific point of view, but also, perhaps more importantly, they're all absolutely committed to what social value we can contribute to the local community. If you go back just behind St Mary's, there are some very deprived areas around Church Street, and so I think there are some real opportunities there. It says in the report that we are awaiting formal notification. The eagle-eyed of you will have spotted on Friday the announcement was made for the BRC, Biomedical Research Centre competition. And I'm very pleased to say that Imperial had an increase in the funding from 88 million over 5 years to 95.2. The even more eagle-eyed will have spotted that wasn't what happened to most centres in London, or what's called the Golden Triangle, and indeed one organisation did get removed from the scheme. The reason I highlight it, partly because I think it's fantastic news. Secondly, though, I think the reason for it was because the trust and the university really did work in partnership to produce a set of documents that really reflected both world-class research, but also a genuine link to the communities that we serve. And I think that commitment to making the research relevant to the geographical location in which we live, I think, is really important. And the final thing I would just like to do is to highlight the rather lengthy list of colleagues who have earned academic promotion at Imperial College this year, which again I think is a fantastic reflection on the commitment of our staff, because many of those people are not paid to do research. It is what they do almost in their spare times. They have produced a lot of really world-class work. But I'm very happy to take any questions on the rest of the paper.
Thank you, Tim. And a bit like in a Roald Dahl novel, you actually see you physically swell with pride when you talk about the BRC stuff. So congratulations to the organisation on that. It is an achievement. Thank you. Turning to Pippa in London North West.
Thank you. It's not great going third, so good luck, Patricia, going fourth, because I think most is very repetitive. But huge thank you to all of our staff who, summer is normally a little bit of a time of a slightly less pace, and that really hasn't happened this summer. So we recognise our job is to absolutely now beef up the health and wellbeing offer and keep morale high so we can get through winter. But the commitment from our staff is absolutely immense. So huge thank you to them. I just want to welcome Tracy. So Tracy Collins has joined us as Chief People Officer. We're delighted to welcome Tracy into the executive team. She started in September and has joined us from Harron Council, where she was the HR director there. So brings a real wealth of external NHS HR knowledge, people knowledge, which we'll be using across the collaborative. So a real great welcome to Tracy. Huge welcome to our 4 new non-executives as well. It's been great to have them on our committees and have them fresh eyes and fresh challenge. And actually, we're all really enjoying that. We did negotiate well, but we didn't win and we lost Neville. So goodbye to Neville. You let us down there, Neville. And also to Andrew Van Doon as well, who we've lost to Hearts Partnership, but we'll keep in touch with him. He was a great partner of ours. I won't go into the operational financial because we'll come into that in the wider papers. But the other thing just to say for us, So we had our Ockenden visits. This is a maternity assurance visit, went very, very well. And actually the teams really recognised the demonstrable change and improvement that has happened in the maternity services over the last 18 months. And some of you have been on that journey with us. We as an organisation know we're absolutely not at a finished compliance stage, but a much more stable maternity service, which now allows us to really do some innovation and growth in that service, which is just fantastic. The other thing just to point out is the development of our new strategy. So by external regulators, we were told the organisation didn't have a robust strategy in the last CQC inspection. That's something we've addressed. But actually what I wanted to do is use this opportunity as an engagement opportunity more than just developing a strategy. And it's been absolutely fantastic, actually. We have had over 850 members of the public contribute towards our strategy. We've been having events in all of our boroughs. We've had virtual events. We've had face-to-face events. We are very supported by our local councillors, and as you've seen, Ketan and Carolyn are big supporters of ours. So we've really got into pockets of our community we wouldn't normally hear from. So that's really fantastic. We've also had nearly 2,200 members of our staff contribute, which to me was really important. When I first went to that organisation, what people told me is they had many, many ideas and they didn't know where to put them. So we're hoping we've captured all of these ideas into that strategy, which will be published and launched and come to this committee actually in January. I think the other thing I would just say is congratulations and well done. So we have been nominated as the Nurse Employer of the Year, which is fantastic. We've had 2 winning national awards. So one is for our virtual heart monitoring ward, which is fantastic. You know, we all know that the virtual wards are absolutely going to be a thing of the future, and this really is a gold standard service that they offer. So it was really great to get that recognition. And the other award is a fantastic digital inequalities technology that we've used that actually transcribes prescription medication instructions into our top languages, and that's also been recognised in a national award as well. It's a really important project that we've been leading at the organisation, so that's fantastic to get that recognition. The last thing I'd like to talk about is Beryl Carr. So Beryl is now over 100. She volunteers every single week at our hospital. Matthew and I had the pleasure of meeting her at our staff awards. She absolutely was the star of the show. And she has just been nominated and voted as one of the happiest Britons by the Independent newspaper. That can only be true because she absolutely lit up our whole Wembley Stadium when we had our staff awards there. She is a fantastic lady. But otherwise, just a huge thank you to my team and to my staff.
Perfect. Thank you, Virginia. And Beryl was extraordinary. I'm going to turn to Patricia, and then I will open up for if anybody has any questions for the Chief Executive. So, Patricia.
Thank you, Matthew. So I will finish by thanking the staff at Hillingdon. And I think I repeat what all my colleagues have said. The staff have continued to work at an extraordinary level and extraordinary pace through COVID and after COVID. It doesn't feel like it's gone away. And we do rely every day on the dedication of staff who work within the NHS. And actually, I've been really pleased that having had a couple of years where we haven't really had the opportunity to celebrate staff, we've had the opportunity in the last couple of months both to have a Trust Open Day, which was a really fantastic opportunity for both the public to come back into the Trust and see what we were doing, but actually also for staff to go around a number of stalls that we held in our education centre and in our staff restaurant, and just see some of the amazing work that our staff were doing and some of the enthusiasm from our staff. And actually we saw that again, although it's not in here, we saw that last Thursday when we had our staff awards event, and Matthew made a presentation to our patch team, who are an integrated paediatric team that work both in the Acute Trust and in the community, and the huge enthusiasm from that team about what they did on the open day, but also what they're doing on an everyday basis to improve the lives of children who are discharged from hospital. So I think it has been a couple of months of us having an opportunity to really start to celebrate our staff and the way they operate. Tied into that, we were actually really very honoured to receive a set of panels, and Matthew mentioned this in his report as well, a set of panels that were given to the NHS from the Embroiderers Guild, and they're a set of 10 centimetre panels that have been embroidered representing either personal experiences or as a thank you to NHS staff. And I would encourage people, Melanie and I, or Melanie was approached through the nursing hierarchy to see if anybody would like to host these. And it turned out that actually both Melanie and I have family members who are embroiderers. So it felt like a very appropriate thing for us to receive the panels. And if you are at Hillingdon, we have 2 of the panels in the entrance at Hillingdon and 1 at Mount Vernon, and they are absolutely exquisite. They really are a testament to the amount of detail and the thought that's gone into people giving something back to the NHS. So we're very proud to have that. In terms of hospital redevelopment, we are slightly further ahead than Imperial in terms of hospital redevelopment, in that we have submitted our outline business case for a new hospital on the Hillingdon site, and have also submitted for planning permission, and thanks to Jason and his team who've done the most amazing work to get it to the place we are. We have also over the last couple of years had some decant and enable work, which has allowed us to move services around in preparation for starting to clear part of the site for the new hospital build. So we hope we'll hear in the next few months about the next phase of that work. And tied into that, we have also reviewed our trust strategy, in that we need a strategy that takes us from now until the new hospital development. And we're just about to publish that in a format that is very much a journey between now and the redevelopment. We've done a huge amount of consultation around the redevelopment, but staff told us that they needed something that took them on that journey to the new hospital. And we're having quite a tight strategy, but actually reflects what we've heard from staff and from the feedback from our local population as part of the redevelopment. And then finally, just to celebrate some of the work. I should say, you'll see from the performance reports and the financial reports, as a trust, we're what's known as SOF 4. So we're under significant scrutiny from the regulators, both in terms of quality and in terms of finances. But actually, even with all of that scrutiny, we have a lot to celebrate at Hillingdon Hospital's FD. Something that we are incredibly good at is sustainability. So our sustainability team win awards, it seems like every month or so, and huge enthusiasm. So they were shortlisted for 2 award categories at the National Sustainability Awards. And the other thing that we're very proud of is that we are an exemplar in terms of advice and guidance, which is a system whereby GPs refer patients to our consultants. They get a consultation based on the information that the patient doesn't get a consultation, but the consultants feed back to the GPs about whether or not the patient needs to be seen, or provide advice to them about how they might manage patient care. And that is dramatically reducing the number of referrals to the trust. And it, is a really good evidence of the use of digital, but also using our acute resource in a very effective way. So we are an exemplar in London and nationally on that. And in fact, I think Tina is presenting on that at the Chief Exec's meeting later this week. So a lot to do, but a lot to celebrate. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much, Patricia. Do we have any questions for the Chief Executive? Yes, please, Aman.
Thank you. Linda and I have the privilege of visiting the
Microphone on, Aman.
Sorry. So Linda and I had the privilege of going to Mary's last week, and I think we were so impressed with the professionalism of the staff and the fact they were working so hard in such difficult circumstances. And hearing the reports of the chief executives around the redevelopment of hospitals, it struck me that there's quite a lot of estates work being carried out across the 4 hospitals. I mean, I think that what we do need is an overall master plan, because it does bring with it economies of scale. And I don't know to what extent we have considered that. I know we have an infrastructure subcommittee, but I don't know whether it's begun to have a look at that yet or not.
Thank you. Patricia, do you want to say something on behalf of the infrastructure committee? Because I know this is a thing that's reasonably high up on our agenda.
So at the moment, the way we've structured the infrastructure committee is that it's predominantly looking at estate and digital in terms of supporting the delivery of clinical care. We've agreed for the rest of this year that the capital plans are very much contained within the individual trusts and will be dealt with through the finance and performance committees. But I think what, having had our first committee, and Bob might want to add to this, I think there is a sense that over time we will start to pull together an estates overview across all of the organisations, and then we start to think about how we use our resources collectively to deliver a more cohesive plan for the estate across North West London.
Bob, did you want to add anything to that?
Thank you, Chair. Patricia's right, and Emma makes an extremely valid point. I don't want to preempt when we get into later bits of terms of reference and reports back, but there will clearly be opportunities for us to discuss about where across infrastructure generally, working collaboratively, we're going to add value both for patients, the people of North West London and the taxpayer in how we utilise scarce resource. I think there's an element of making sure we don't try and do everything at the same time, but I do think the committee will be challenging in its ask for the identification of options. And then once we make a decision about options, pursue them at pace without getting in the way of other decision making forward that we'll have as part of the collaborative.
Thanks very much, Bob. Steve, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. So I won't ask a question about the people or the quality or the performance because we'll get to those in a minute or two. But there was a meeting recently of the executive teams, an away day, and I was curious if you could give us the highlights of what the outcomes are or were from that August body.
Leslie is very enthusiastic to get the first word on this.
I really am, because I just want everybody to understand just how funny Tim Orchard is. So that was an absolute, I mean, who knew, frankly, who knew?
Heaven forbid if that's the best outcome.
But what I would say is actually how we did it was to organise ourselves. So we'll get onto it when we do our presentations. But into the team that work with myself, for example, around performance and finance, did presentations together. So there was a really bonding thing. The others will respond as well. But just to go back to that first question, of course, we have done work together around the elective orthopaedic centre and indeed the community diagnostic hubs.
Go on, Tim.
Thank you. I didn't mean to be so funny, you know. Yeah, it was very good. It was a very, very good day. And we had to pay ourselves because Hammersmith's the only hospital that doesn't have a casualty. But I think it was. We did two things. The first is that we all got to understand a bit more about each other's organisations, which I thought was a really important thing, because I think although we work in the same sector, we haven't necessarily got the understanding of what's important to each team. And then we flipped it round and looked through the lens of the collaborative and the work streams from the collaborative, and it was quite helpful to get that sort of two views. And I think what I certainly witnessed was a lot of people taking the opportunity really to get to know their colleagues across the sector. We then had a very helpful meeting actually at the end where we were able to identify a programme of peer review across our urgent and emergency care pathways before we sort of get into the depths of winter, which I think is a sort of really good example of collaboration in action. So I mean, I think overall we all felt it was an extremely positive day.
Thank you very much. One last question from Linda.
Might come on to this when we're looking at the performance report, but in a similar vein to Amma, I just wondered if on that day or at other opportunities you've had a chance to really think about the workforce element in Pippa in particular, because obviously that's something I would say can't wait, from the health and wellbeing, but also really in terms of any planning we're doing from an education point of view and the lead time in.
Pippa, I'll come to you, but I know we're going to come back to this, so that's
Yeah, we'll cover it, but a really valid point, Linda. What was really helpful is everybody felt that if we were going to do a single thing, it would be around the workforce. And actually the workforce enables all the other programmes to deliver. So we all felt the same. This isn't just about the HRDs delivering something. This is about everyone coming together to deliver what will have to be a different workforce that actually fits the needs of our services. We don't have that right fit size at the moment. So actually we came away quite enthused by that. Everybody felt we need to deliver a different workforce offer to be able to deliver and allow the other programmes to deliver. So yes, it's priority. No pressure.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for that, Pippa. I'm going to move us on. That's it. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I'm going to come to the very exciting acute provider collaborative scheme of delegation and turn to Peter to infuse us.
I'm glad to be the highlight of the meeting. Just a bit of background to the paper and to set the context. So, as you said earlier on, Matthew, back in July, the 4 individual trust boards met individually to approve the governance model, which enabled the establishment of the acute provider collaborative. And in that paper, you'll remember that included sort of the core principles and the overall structure that enabled this sort of collaborative governance arrangements to work. So the scheme of reserve powers and delegated authority now sets out how that actually works in practice, how the governance model works, and importantly, the delegation of powers from the 4 individual trust boards to enable the boards to come together like it has done today as a board in common. So the delegation of duties and responsibilities, including matters that are reserved for the individual trust boards, are set out in the papers. And as we come on to the next exciting item is then translated into the terms of reference for each of the different layers of the governance that we're going through. We also include in the paper some financial limits as well, some financial authority limits and the delegated authority around that. And what we've tried to do is achieve the balance between allowing individual trust boards or board committees to approve local business cases so that we can get on and do the business of individual trusts, balance against the need to take a collaborative view around longer term significant investments, which will obviously come to here. So we will continue to review this scheme of delegated authority as we go through this process. It will be reviewed at least on an annual basis, where trust boards will reaffirm their delegated authority to this board in common. So for today, so in order for us to get started, we are seeking approval of this scheme of delegated authority.
Okay. Has anybody got any questions for Peter? Tricia.
Matthew, it's not a question, it's just a point of accuracy. I realise that we talk about NHS-IE in the paper, and I think NHS-IE doesn't exist anymore, it's just NHS-E. So it's just really a correction, seeing as we're starting off fresh.
Thank you. Other than that, is everybody happy to? Oh, my apologies, Peter.
Thank you, Matthew. Peter, I may have missed it. I couldn't see anything about the board in common cabinet in the papers.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, it's an important point. So it's not included in the scheme of reserve powers. It is covered in the covering paper that you'll see, and it's important because we don't want to routinely set a delegated authority to that board in common cabinet. The purpose of the cabinet is we recognise there is going to need to be business transacted between these meetings that we have here on a quarterly basis. So there may well be some urgent business that we need to transact. What we anticipate is that this board in common grants the authority and grants the delegated authority to that cabinet to act on behalf of this board in common. It's really important that the primacy in terms of decision making rests here in terms of the 4 boards coming together rather than the cabinet. So we work that out, I think, as we go through. We've not set any routine authorities for that cabinet.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, are we happy to accept the delegated powers as laid out, scheme of delegation as laid out here? I see nods all around the room. Excellent. Thank you very much, Peter. Good job. So moving on to the equally exciting terms of reference for the various committees. And I think I'm coming to you, David, for this one.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll be equally, I hope, brief and clear as well. The terms of reference add flesh to the bones of the framework that was agreed in July. They fit with the scheme of delegation. The board in common terms of reference gives the framework for the operation of this board in common. The collaborative committees have looked at and reviewed and commented upon their terms of reference, and you'll see in their cover sheets for their respective reports that they have done so. And in fact, in the case of the People Committee, made some amendments to the terms of reference which have been incorporated. And you'll also recall from the July framework paper that the collaborative was going to set up a collaborative appointments and remuneration committee. Each trust has its own statutory appointments and remuneration committee. So this is a non-statutory function of the board in common. But I think it was felt at the time appropriate that, again, in a spirit of collaboration, that we take a collaborative view of appointments and remuneration where that's appropriate. So unless the committee chairs would like to add anything further in respect of their committees, the terms of reference are offered for the board in commons approval.
Thank you, David. I'm prepared to believe that we will find typos in these documents, as many of us have read these many times over it. So feel free to feed those back outside the meetings. Any other questions? Very good. Thank you very much. We will accept those terms of reference as well. So that is and I know that Peter and David were very keen that we got those two things out of the way before we got on to the meat of the agenda, in order that we have some basis for everything else that we do. So thank you. So now we are moving on to what I think is the meat, which is the integrated performance, quality and workforce report, and then the report backs from the committees in common. So I'm going to turn first of all to Leslie to talk about the integrated report.
All right. So thank you very much, Chairman. And as colleagues would know around the table, the Chairman, in all his wisdom, decided to allocate various work streams to various chief execs, and I'll leave you to decide who must have been the worst behaved, frankly. So in terms of our finance and performance report, so it's a very long report and a lot of detail, and let me say thank you to Patricia and colleagues for the amount of effort that went into bringing into place some very granular information. But I'm just going to headline it with my expectation is that you will have read all of that, and you'll have some questions about it. And as we go to questions, I will ask the individual chief operating officers and the chief financial officers of the individual trusts for if there's some specific questions. But just to say this, and I may incur a bit of wrath around this, but so performance is, and indeed our finances are very challenged, but that is in a context of a very challenged national picture. And in the context of that, and I say this because we're in the public arena, which is the performance in London is the best performing region in the country. And Northwest London is usually either top or second in terms of the overall performance. So that I just wanted to set that context. In terms of the discussions that we have in our newly formed weekly meeting is, what are we trying to set out to do? So in essence, we're trying to ensure, and this speaks to serving our populations, to ensure that ambulances, when they get to our hospitals, are released as quickly as possible so they can go out and pick up other patients that may need to come to us. We're trying to ensure that our sickest patients in our emergency department are seen in an appropriate timescale, and that actually we continuously improve the overall waiting times for patients in urgent and emergency care. We then are trying to ensure that actually in terms of our elective recovery, that we treat our sickest patients first, that we then treat patients in turn. And as we're doing that, we try and make sure that we're addressing our inequalities agenda. And I think that I hope that you will see, and we of course will take questions of this, that we are making progress. Still more progress to make, but progress is being made. We're expecting later on today to see the winter plan announced from the centre, which again, I think will start to describe what will be expected from the constituent parts of the system, right from primary care into our hospitals and then out into community. I just, in a way, this is a response to the stuff that Ketan and indeed Carolyn said earlier. Part of the challenge is the whole system is challenged. The whole health and care system is challenged. And to enable us to be as efficient as we can in our acute units, we need every single other constituent part of the NHS and the care system to be as efficient as possible as well. So we need patients in hospital, in our acute units, we need to have just the patients that need to be in an acute unit. And we know that that's not the case at the moment. We know in every single part of our organisations, there are patients who are waiting for community care, for mental health care, and indeed for local authority ongoing care. And the reason that that's important is, of course, it actually challenges us in terms of the numbers of patients we can bring in, but we also know that patients actually deteriorate whilst they're sitting in hospital beds. So we're working as a system incredibly hard. So I'm just looking at Julian, who's leading a lot of this work as well nationally. We're working very hard to ensure that's happening. And of course, the impact of all of this on our finances is we need to maximise income for in terms of the elective recovery. And in some places we're doing better than others in terms of doing that. We need to collaborate with each other to ensure that where there are strains on the system, both in terms of performance and in terms of money, that we're supporting each other. And we need to, as we build this collaboration, we need to learn from each other about what is the most efficient way to provide care to patients. And you'll see from the financial reports that we're starting those discussions about how we do that. And of course, that has resulted in some of the work that we're doing around elective, the elective orthopaedic centre and other work, consolidation work, for example, between London North West and Imperial. So I'm going to leave it there because there are some very specific questions, I think, but I just wanted to try and set a context for all of that.
Thank you, Leslie. Any questions? Steve?
Okay, well, I had several because there's lots and lots and lots of information in here, Leslie.
That's always the problem, isn't it? You give it non-execs information.
Exactly. So maybe I can pick on three. So the first one is the growing patient tracking list with a projection deep inside here that this would grow from around 213,000 in March 22 to almost 300,000 in March 2023. So the first question is, what is it that we think that we can do to be able to try and change that trajectory? And there is a comment that says that if we do certain things, we can get it to 250, but I'm curious about your confidence level in doing it. The second one, and there are only three, the second one is around ERF. The current position is that we're not achieving the activity levels to be able to get the funding. The projection says that at the aggregate level, by the end of the year, we will be on track to do that. So I'm curious what it is that we're going to be able to do differently to enable it to happen. And the third one is around ambulance handovers and breaches. And there's some particularly, when you dig into the detail, there seems to be some issues, but particularly some issues in Northwick Park. So maybe you could comment on those two.
Do you want to deconstruct the phrase ERF as well for when you answer?
My apologies.
So no, it was my fault actually. So ERF stands for the Elective Recovery Fund. It describes in a way a financial incentive for treating more patients. So if I start with that actually, in terms of the Elective Recovery Fund, right here, right now, that is accounted for differentially in the accounts of all four trusts. We know that for the first half of the year that money will definitely flow into the Acute Collaborative and will because of the fact that although we haven't absolutely met the activity target, there is an acknowledgement of the centre that actually COVID continued. There were infection control procedures in place and indeed continue to be in place that actually challenged our ability to deliver as much activity as had been expected. By the way, there are trusts that did manage to do that. So Imperial did, and should take credit for that. We were reasonably close, but not close enough, frankly. And there have been challenges in some of our other trusts. But for the first half of the year, we will receive that money. The truth of the matter is that those pressures continue, and I think there is a growing understanding nationally that that money will still need to flow into the acute units to allow them to continue to work in the way they are, and indeed to expand our ability to treat even more patients. But that discussion is taking place, and others may want to talk about that with our chief financial officers. So the patient tracking list, the PTL. Sorry, I should have. I shouldn't use these terms. So by all means, correct me. I'm going to hand over to our chief operating officers for them to. It's probably above my pay grade, frankly.
Thank you, Leslie. So I think the first thing I'd say about the PTL, Steve, is this is occurring nationally. It's not unique to North West London. Excuse me. We've been doing a big piece of work looking at what's actually the driver here in North West London. GP referrals have increased by 5%, but we're also doing a huge amount of work on advice and guidance, which will help address and revert referrals back to primary care. We're also looking at transformative models of service delivery, so looking at how we might perhaps transform pathways so we treat patients in groups, so we can actually get through the waiting list much quicker. There's no easy answer to this. I think the other thing I would say, though, is that we're doing an extensive piece of validation of our waiting list, and that's happening across the country. So that growth that's forecast is very much worst case scenario.
Can I just for people who are listening in, PTL is the code we're now using for what we used to call waiting lists. But in the olden days, when people think of a waiting list, and I think when they still do in the news, they think of waiting lists as people who are waiting for surgery. Now we're talking about people who are waiting for anything, including their outpatient appointment or their diagnostic. That is the patient tracking list. So when we report how many people are waiting, we're talking about waiting at any point. And then we try to make sure we order that both by quality and by how long people have been waiting. So by need and how long people are waiting. So first of all, we treat the people with the greatest clinical need, and then we try and work from the people who've been waiting longest backwards down the list. So and that Leslie talked previously about our ambition to treat people in turn, so that you wait according to your need. You don't wait according to anything else. And it's a new phrase that, well, it's not new to the NHS, but it's starting to sneak out into the public. It's a bigger version of what we used to call the waiting list.
And maybe if I can just add a comment, because I wouldn't want my question to come across as negative. There's some really good work being done on the 104-week waits, which have largely come down to zero. There's some incredibly good work on the 78-week, which has come down in 3 of the 4 trusts. But the 52-week waits, which are people waiting over a year, is on an upward trajectory within that. So that's everywhere. Here and nationally, and clearly that's the focus of what you were talking about, Rob. Thanks.
Tina, can I come to you?
Yeah, so I think the power in this is absolutely the acute care collaborative and working on those 78 weeks and 52 weeks together. Hillingdon's a slight outlier in that our PTL is growing a bit faster than anybody else's in North West London. And we're actually working with the London and the national team because of our advice and guidance is so successful and is actually driving down our referrals, that we've got to understand that trend for both the sector and nationally so that we do the right thing for advice and guidance and particularly for patients. So not only are we doing work at North West London to make sure that we're treating those sickest and longest waiting first, we're also doing some work with the national team about is advice and guidance actually going to be the answer at the end of the day.
To the ambulance handover question, and given where we are at Northwood, I think we'll hand that to Pippa.
Thank you. So yes, obviously we have the biggest A&E department in London, which is a great gift for an organisation that we're delighted to have. And our activity is way above 1920. So if an ERF was on the emergency pathway, I'd have a very happy CFO, but unfortunately it's not. It's on a block contract. But the key thing in all of this is doing the right thing for patients. And what we've put in the last week actually is immense. So my colleagues have worked really hard in the executive team to put in some new clinical pathways, which we implemented middle of last week. So we have now got a bespoke programme in place where many of you have heard about the Bristol model. The Bristol model is actually, it's not a model, it's just a flow process they put in place in Bristol that worked for them. We have adapted that. So we move patients and we spread the risk across our organisation. We don't just hold patients in A&E. That has worked very successfully. We're only in week 1 of that, and it has taken a lot of visible leadership from the executive team to get our clinicians on board with that. And I have to say, our clinicians at all levels have really stood up and really taken this and managed it very well, which is fantastic. That's made a big difference to our performance over the weekend and last week, which is great. We've also piloted another model with London Ambulance Service that we piloted last Monday and made a significant change actually, which was where we worked with what we call a halo. So an assessor in a London Ambulance Service who assessed all the patients that were coming in an ambulance that wasn't a blue light ambulance, and we bypassed them straight into our same day emergency care. And around 17% of our patients bypassed straight past A&E and went straight into our same day emergency care, and actually none of them needed admitted. So they were treated on the day, they didn't need admitted. It was a really successful pilot. So James and John are working with LAS to get that as to a permanent model as well. And the other thing we're now exploring is very much like you'll have heard there's lots of names being floated around at the moment, but single point of access. So where paramedics can actually speak straight to A&E consultants, clinicians, so they can actually try and prevent some of the conveyancing. So we're just working through a model of how we do that. We've currently got that in place loosely for paramedics and for all GPs. So we're looking at expanding that so we can hopefully then just reduce our ambulance conveyances.
Tim.
I guess it's just, I think it's just worth highlighting because it hasn't quite come out so far that all of the trusts are, I think, busier in their emergency pathways than they have ever been. And in terms of attendances, I think it's really important. Not all of them are being converted to admissions, but actually just the people rocking up at the front door is much busier. And we're all, for whatever reason, sitting every morning with patients in our emergency department in the way that we haven't been in years gone by. And I think it's the reason I mention it, of course, is because it's the urgent and emergency care pathways where quality and performance issues are going to collide in winter. And so I think we've all got to be really, really aware of that and work out how to deal with it. And I think I mentioned it earlier, you know, we're very lucky. Julian may be wishing he hadn't taken the job, but he is the national clinical director for urgent emergency care. So he's very kindly agreed to lead a series of peer reviews. And I think that is good from a positive perspective, which is that I think if we can go around all of our emergency care pathways and understand where we're doing things really well and where things could be improved, we're then going to have a sort of quality summit at the end of it to try and make sure that we've got that best practice in place. That's positive part of it. It's also, of course, being blunt about it, a really effective defensive mechanism for when people say, well, things aren't going terribly well. We can say, well, actually, look, we have done everything we possibly can to make sure we're providing the best possible care.
Thank you, Tim. And it's one of the questions which we'll pick up right at the end was about what is the evidence that the collaborative is making a difference. And I think A&E is one of those areas where the trust, we have 7 A&Es across North West London. There are 28 across the whole of London, A&E departments. Our A&Es do share burden between them. They do take patients from each other when they're under pressure. And with the focus that people have picked up in the papers about how long people spend in the back of an ambulance before they're transferred out, it's worth noting that across the 28 A&Es in London, the 3 highest performing, as in you are less likely to wait for a long time in a back of an ambulance before you get moved into the A&E. The 3 highest performing ones were all in North West London. 6 of our 7 were in the top half in North West London, and none of our A&Es were in the bottom third. So that is a sign that they're working really hard and they're doing well, but also the extent to which the A&Es are supporting each other in a collaborative way. So thanks to that.
I wondered, Chair, if you wanted to hear from the CFOs actually about the finance performance.
Let me move on to, oh, sorry. And then I'm going to move us on to the report from the Finance and Performance Committee, and then we'll pick up the CFO's view.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just on the side so you couldn't see me. Thank you. So thank you for all the great work which is being done. And it's been, absolutely, as I've read the report, one thing which has come out is how we are trying to do different things, trying to tackle our specific problems to address the performance issues. What would be very, very useful for us, and this is it's the first meeting, is to start seeing that exact conversation that Tim referred to. What's working? Where's the evidence? What we need to prioritize across the North West London, and probably some things which we need to work together, some things we just need to work in our own areas, but all of us scaling up, and some things we need to stop doing because somebody has tried it and it hasn't worked. So hope to see more of that going forward. That was just my observation. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinetta. What I think I'll do now is move on to the first of the reports from the collaborative committees and come to Catherine, who is the chair of the Finance and Performance Committee.
Thank you very much, Chair. And Leslie, your comments about being blessed with your role in Finance and Performance Committee made me chuckle as the chair working with you. So we had our first Finance and Performance Collaborative Committee a little while ago, and I felt it was a really positive event, and I expect chairs from the other collaborative committees will probably echo this, because it was really fabulous to be in the same room with colleagues right across the Acute Collaborative talking about common issues and exploring working together to determine learning and best practice and solutions to those issues. So I think it was a really positive experience. There are dual roles to these committees in common, and the first role is around assurance. And so we did take some time to walk through what's happening at local trust level to really sort of see the evidence base and the process that feeds up through the Acute Collaborative that gives us the assurance that these issues are being reviewed, scrutinised, understood at local level. And so I think we were certainly assured, having gone through that process and having received reports from the local trusts, each of the 4 trusts. It's clear that there are a lot of common issues, and certainly there's a range of performance across the Acute Collaborative, as you would expect, but Leslie's highlighted some of the sort of common pressures which are absolutely in evidence right across the health system, and Steve's questions around finance performance have really preempted some of the discussions that we had and some of the sort of focus of the conversation in terms of what we look to do going forward. So, certainly the second part of our discussion was really around, so in terms of understanding where we are collectively, what are the opportunities for the Acute Collaborative to resolve these issues? And I think that's where we sort of started to really sort of get the energy up in the room in terms of where those opportunities for collaborative working were going to be developed and where the opportunities for learning are going to take place. So very much looking forward to the second committee where we're bringing back a lot of that. I think a couple of other things that I would draw the board's attention to, just to sort of reflect on our host's conversation earlier this morning. One of the appetites, I think, for finance performance was really to understand that we, as we develop our data sets, as Matthew sort of said, this is very much a journey. We were very pleased to see the collaborative pack and have an appetite to sort of get even greater understanding and granularity in some areas. But one of the things that we were particularly interested in understanding was really, how this process is promoting treatment and access for our more deprived communities. And so we're looking forward to also building that into our deliberations. We are going to go to this, but I think clearly as Finance Performance Committee, a key focus was really understanding at month 4 what our cumulative financial performance was, and we are adrift of our targets, not surprisingly, and we unpack that to sort of really be related to 3 different areas. And we've spoken about the ERF funding, which is attached to activity and performance. The other 2 areas which I think we've said less about is the requirements that all health organisations have to make savings on an annual basis. That's been stood down during COVID, the COVID period. So trusts are really having to stand that activity back up. And I think right across the piece, the discussion showed that has been quite problematic, both in terms of defining those savings schemes and actually getting them going and delivering on them. So we are behind the pace on that. And there was a lot of discussion around sharing learning and process, and indeed identifying those schemes that are working in individual trusts and bringing those together. And then the third element, I guess, is something that we've sort of all had, very much at the forefront for ourselves over the last few weeks in terms of the inflationary cost pressure impact. And of course, that also comes into play in our environment. And so those are the three areas that we really sort of started to unpack. And the CFOs, I'm sure, will say a lot more about what's happening in that space. So Leslie, I don't know if there's an update on this, but one of the concerns that we did have, we're looking towards winter, looking towards the pressures from increased activity right throughout the summer. We've said we didn't have a quiet summer. We know winter's always difficult, and we know that getting patient flow through trusts is enormously important in that context. And we did have a discussion around some of the discharge to assess processes, which normally enables us to move patients through our respective trusts, the funding to that being problematic. And so I think there was this sort of conversation out with the ICS in terms of resolving that. So Leslie, hopefully you'll have an update for us. We've spoken about the patient tracking list. To note, we've made great progress in terms of the targets around 104-week waits. We're making good progress on 78, but as we've identified, the 52-week wait is a challenge to us, and we are continuing to invest and work to understand how we mitigate that. And so I think those are my key observations, Chair.
Thank you, that's great. Catherine.
So thank you. Yeah, I think we heard Carolyn say earlier that I think there's been some resolution around the discharge to assess money. And indeed, actually, one of the things we will consider as a collaborative is there anything more we could do, including financially, to support local authority social services to be able to take more patients. Of course, there's a national discussion about that as well. But that will definitely help us be able to keep flow going. The other discussion will be what percentage of patients that are we going to treat that are day cases and outpatients, and to try and make sure we treat as many patients during the winter, but more as time goes on about that. Thank you. I'd like to hand over to Jazz if I could. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie, and thanks, Chair. So without repeating everything Catherine said, I think what we recognise as CFOs, we aren't where we need to be financially. We set a plan that we thought was challenging but deliverable, and it included the 3 key areas that I think Catherine talked about in terms of the level of elective recovery we needed to undertake and make sure we secured that income. We're not where we are, I think, for the reasons Leslie articulated around COVID and IPC guidance, but that's not to say that we don't need to step into that space and then think about mitigations for that. In terms of the cost improvement programme, again, challenging but deliverable. I think it's circled around 3% of our cost base. And there was a real, I think, psychological shift for us as organisations about getting cost out rather than growing our income to manage that position. So that has been more challenging. I think the operational pressures have also meant people really haven't had the headspace to go away and do that. In terms of inflation, operational pressures, absolutely. So in our plans, there was a level of income made available by the national team to deal with inflationary pressure, But I think we're all recognising in our personal lives as well as in our organisations that we're likely to exceed that funding, and we're tracking at the moment what we think that may be. And that's not probably all articulated in our month 5 financial position. So there is a key risk, I think, brewing there. In terms of efficiencies, I think as a group of CFOs, we meet every other week. We've got our teams looking at opportunities that we're undertaking in our organisations. And what could we do as a collaborative or even at an ICS level to really think about the productivity and efficiency schemes that we need to be driving. I think as a collaborative, we are recognising we're probably going to have to find lots of non-recurrent mitigations this financial year to hit the numbers. But absolutely, I think the commitment is about how do we work together so we're in a really good place, that we have an exit run rate that we can afford. That is absolutely key. And also going into 23-24, having an efficiency programme that we can launch on the 1st of April at the latest. So we've got the challenge from this year flowing into next year, and also we'll have a challenge next year that we need to make good on. So it's going to be, I think, quite critical as a collaborative. We have honest conversations about what are we going to have to do to make those things balance out. So that's the income and expenditure position, Matthew. In terms of capital, I think there's the report. We are slightly behind our capital plan at the moment. The forecast is that we will achieve our capital plan, although there are some risks in there again around inflationary pressure, and will there be more funding made available to deal with that. But successfully secured funding for the elective orthopaedic hub, and we've also successfully secured funding for the diagnostic centres and also some other transformation things that are happening in each organisation. And the last point I make is around cash. So we're all pretty resilient in terms of cash, because when we compare that to pre-pandemic levels, we have got more cash in the system. However, I think as CFOs, we're very mindful we can't erode that resilience, because it's easy to spend that money, but I think we need to make sure we keep an eye on that as well. So I think that will probably be the summary from CFOs.
Great, Jess. Thank you very much. Linda, do you have a question?
Two, if I may. The first one is in terms of the financial position and the risks that emerge from that. How do we make sure now that we don't have local trust boards that the risks feed across, for example, to the quality committees, so that we're really cognizant of that? And the second question is where one of the trusts may be more financially challenged than another, how do we make sure that the collaborative adds value in terms of sharing the risks, again, particularly around quality?
Leslie's just itching.
Well, I don't know if I'm itching, but so a couple of things. So I think they're very good questions. We do need to ensure that actually, particularly where we're making decisions or in F&P, that actually that absolutely translates into what's the quality impact of that on our patients and indeed our staff. So I think we'll go away and think about that more carefully, Linda, and come back with a proper answer about the how we do it. We certainly do it, but we do. There is no doubt that there are some differential financial positions sitting in our sector at the moment, and Patricia acknowledged earlier about Hillingdon and Soft 4. So there is very particular work going on actually at Hillingdon within the collaborative, and indeed with the national teams about how we seek to address that, both to manage to balance the position this year and meet plan, and we possibly have a plan to be able to do that this year. It's a bit about what is the resilience and how do we do that, and what is the plan on an ongoing basis, and just to assure this board that that work is being done as we speak. We were all in a meeting on Friday with the national team to discuss that. That the results that will go back to F&P, and we will need to ensure that this board is well cited by Patricia, John, and indeed the collaborative, exactly where we are and what the next part of the plan is. I think it's likely, or we don't know this yet, but it's likely as the discussions go on around what will put trust in different sectors will be a wider discussion around. It's not just about money, it is about quality, it is about performance as well. So those discussions are going on at the moment.
Thank you, Leslie. I just pick up on that last point. The answer to the collaborative dealing with financial challenges across the organisation isn't simply to move money around. We'll just do that until we've managed to generate a financial problem in every organisation. The answer to this is to use the weight of the collaborative to drive productivity, use our staff efficiently, deliver optimal care, and actually be thinking about the underlying causes of a financial problem, not just the bottom line number. And I think that we should be carrying the objective to be able to of delivering a balance across the system, but we should be doing that by saying how do we change the way we work in partnership in order to achieve that. I'd like to move us on to the Quality Committee. If you can hang on to your energies, that will be great. In which case, I shall move to the Collaborative Quality Committee and turn to you, Steve, as the chair, to give us a brief introduction.
Okay, well, thank you. So I'll take the paper as read. I'll just pick out a few highlights. So we did approve the terms of reference, and I'm delighted that the board in common approved it. We agreed 5 priority work streams, and I won't repeat them because they're listed in the paper. We did note, which is probably not a surprise, that there are different ways that the data comes together. There's variances in the way in which we measure it and report it. Hardly a surprise to any of us. But clearly, as we move forward, we need a more consistent approach so that we can deal with that in a different way. We did agree that we would look at the detailed updates on the 5 work streams at the next meeting, which is in mid-December. We agreed an extra program of work around risk, so that we understand what our appetite for risk is and the way in which we're handling risk, which again is different. The enormous pack of data that you saw within the papers today was not available to all of the various different trust quality committees at the time we had the individual meetings. So what we asked each of the trust execs to do is to give a short report out on the areas which were at variance, to make sure that we had assurance on the issues that were being highlighted. And we did receive those assurances. That doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't significant work to be done on some of them, but we did reach assurance that we understood what they were and that we had a plan that we were going to work on. Really importantly, we agreed on 3 pillars of how we're actually going to go forward to get the benefits from what we're doing as a collaborative. So I mentioned the first one a minute ago. We want transparent and comparable data, really important for us to be able to work on. We want to be evidence-based on best practice, because clearly what we're trying to do, and it came up in the statement of intent, we want to take out unwarranted variance in terms of both access and delivery of care. And to enable us to do that, the output from that is, if you like, in terms of delivering it, is to implement best practice everywhere. And we want to do that across the services, applying, and I almost used the acronym, but I'll spell it out, get it right first time, across the collaborative and not just in the individual trusts. And we agreed amongst the committee, and this is another really important piece of work that needs to be done, that we will do prioritized clinical peer reviews against the key pathways where we think that we can make a difference. So identifying the improvements, identifying the staff and skills changes and gaps, and identifying the investments that we need to make, both in terms of people and CapEx. And then the last couple of things that we looked at is we did look at CNST, which is the Clinical Negligence Scheme for Trusts, which is very important for us. There's a 10-point plan that we're working to enable us to be compliant by the revised date of the 3rd of February. We received assurances that we do have risks in getting there, but we have a plan which would enable us to meet that deadline and be compliant by that date. And we also looked at where we currently are on the Ockenden reports, the interim and the final Ockenden reports. And again, there are issues in there, but we received assurances that we were on track to be compliant within the timelines that are set out. And then the last thing we did is we tried to align our forward plans between the collaborative committee and the local committees, so that we're feeding things through from the trust up into trusts into the committee.
Great, thank you very much, Steve. Tim, is there anything you want to add to that?
Thanks, Will. Steve's given a very, very comprehensive summary. Just a couple of, I suppose, contextual points which may or may not be helpful. I think the first thing is obviously, like all the other collaborative committees, I think we think that quality is the most important. But of course, it does link very strong. I mean, we've already heard the links into the other committees. I mean, I think one of the key things, and I think if we think about inequalities, actually, access is a key part of quality, and actually one of the best ways of making sure that you get through your eliminate inequalities actually to just crack through your waiting list. I think it's a really important first point. But of course, actually, and the peer review that we discussed earlier, came out of a joint meeting of the quality and performance groups. So I think that was very helpful. Counter to what you might expect, having said all of that, of course, is that actually quality is one of the areas where the trusts have not actually reported in the same way. There is no national set of metrics for quality, and our response has been very, very effective around quality and safety, but it's been largely tactical. So we've had, we transferred 241 patients between our ICUs during COVID. We transferred 3,500 patients between our trusts in order to get them treated more quickly than they would otherwise have done. We've done the tactical stuff very well. We haven't, though, alighted on a set of consistent metrics across the whole of the collaborative. If you look at the data that we have got, it's quite good for identifying a longitudinal change for each individual trust. It's almost impossible to compare between trusts. Of course, this is the one area we really do need to make sure that we can understand what the differences are, and as Steve said, eliminate variation that is not warranted. So I think that's going to be a key thing, and particularly so. I'm meeting the medical and nurse directors weekly. They had a meeting, so for some reason thought that it would be best without me this week just gone, which I can't. The reasons for mine completely elude me. To go back through the metrics actually and to come to an agreement about how we might change some of them. I think if you look at the patient experience ones, we're nowhere near getting those right at the moment because we've got the results of audits that we've got no idea how big they are. So, what does 100% approval mean if 2 people were asked? So I think we've got quite a lot of work to do on those. And we also need to get the denominators right, because clearly, you need to work out, are you doing it on the basis of bed days, on patients through, number of members of staff, whatever it is. So there's quite a lot of work to do to get, I think, the metrics into a form that's going to be really helpful for us, and then of course can help at an executive level us decide which are those pathways that we need to prioritize to get the peer reviews in to sort stuff out. I think, as you said, the getting it right first time process is incredibly important, and Gubi and John have lucked out there by getting that path, those things to work on, because if you look across the specialties where we're trying to drive high volumes of elective activity, they've identified key sentinel metrics in the GIRFT outcomes that they want to focus on. And so again, I think that will be a good starting point for working out where there is variation, how we can change it. Final thing I do just want to reiterate, because there is when you said 10, I thought you were going to talk about pounds, actually, Steve, but actually there's well over 10 million pounds of money in terms of the clinical negligence scheme for trusts that is at stake if we get the plan right. So it is important for the board, I think, to note that we did review all of the Q2 data from every trust at the Quality Committee, and we were assured that that all of those plans were on course to deliver by the date in February when we should need to be. And I think this board should just formally acknowledge that.
Very good, Tim. Thank you very much. Yes, Sim.
Thank you. Question for Tim, if I may. Tim, you alluded to this sort of perfect storm, vacancy sort of increases, staff turnover, and then the increase at our front doors of A&E, and this sort of coming together of quality, performance and workforce. But I think you alluded to it just now. One thing that I think is going to be really important is to maintain the patient voice within this storm, if you like. So can you just help and tell us a little bit about how and what extra steps we're taking to gather and monitor patient feedback as they enter our hospitals and sort of are encountered with the service that we're providing at the moment? What are we doing?
That's a really good question, Sim. So I think there's two bits to that, aren't there? There's a bit about what do we know about the patient's experience when they come through the door. So the important thing there actually is to make sure that we are actually gathering the feedback. And of course, the standard way of doing that is the friends and family test. How helpful that is, I think, is a slightly moot point. You get more from the written feedback that you get from that. And one of the things that I think we'll be looking to do is we've did quite a neat thing where we were able to use some clever bods at Imperial were able to do natural language processing. So they can basically take all of the free text that you get from the friends and family, and then you can pull out the themes. So you can make the word clouds, you can pull out the themes, and then that is more informative than just the friends and family test. Being honest, I think that as we move into the winter, our key focus is going to be on safety. I think the absolute priority will be to make sure that our patients are safe. So if you were to do a friends and family test in the emergency departments, you know, I think it is very likely that what you'll get is, I had to wait a long time. Now, we do need to make sure that if people are waiting a long time, we have done all the stuff that makes that wait as good as possible. And we have made sure that they've had appropriate food and water. They've had an opportunity to call their relatives, that they're in a place that, you know, isn't absolutely awful. I mean, it's some really important basic stuff. So there's that sort of patient experience stuff. Sorry, it's a very long answer, Chair, I apologise. The second bit I think is important, which is, of course, how do we include our patients and populations in making some of the more strategic decisions about how we're planning the services. And I think so working out how we can really use things like our strategic lay partners and our governors to really help inform is going to be a really important thing that I know that our directors of communications are focused on, to make sure that we can pull that in so that we're not just reacting to experience, we're also getting the input at a more strategic level.
Yeah. Pippa, did you want to add something, or did you want to ask Tim a question? We should
Might ask Tim a question. Keep him on his toes, you know. So it was really reassuring actually to hear that the Board in Common Quality Committee and this board have gained assurance on the quality on the Q2 CNST maternity 10-point plan. I guess for me, this is, you've seen the details of the Saving Babies Life audits. Actually, just to give further assurance, they're seen across the North West London local maternity neonatal service network as well. But I think we do need to get to a place next year where we can actually work on them together, because I think what you see in them in that compliance is trusts are in different places, and actually, you know, some of them, like harm-free care pregnancies and smoke-free care pregnancies and preventing term babies going to a neonatal unit, there are many things we can do together. Some trusts have got great examples, some trusts are actually struggling with that. We should be learning together, we should be doing that together, and I think that for me next year will help all 4 of them trusts get up to the compliance much quicker, I think.
Thank you. One last question, Saeed.
Thank you, Chair. Colleagues, we're talking about thinking together, thinking bigger, but also, as Sam alluded, how to think of tailored individual care for our patients. Now, in that, as a carer myself, and thinking of a typical patient that could be my mother, who's disabled, who's got dementia, etc. It doesn't feel terribly joined up, especially the interface between primary care and secondary care. What can we do as a collaborative to try and bring some meaningful cohesion into it? Is there more that can be done than what we've already done? Because at a patient level, it doesn't still feel very joined up. Thank you.
It's a really good question, and it's a really important question, and it's a question that, you know, it goes to the heart of why do we have the ICS and why do we have why do we have this collaborative. I think this may not fill you with total joy in my answer, but it's an honest answer. One of the key things actually we talked about when we were away as an executive was, what is our approach between now and next April? Because there is so much that we can do together in this collaborative. It would be really tempting simply to go full tilt and try and do everything. If we do that, we will achieve nothing. And we know we're going into a difficult winter. And I think we were very focused on actually asking the question, where are we going to add value by doing things together? And I think that's the process that we're working through, certainly in quality at the moment. And so Steve alluded to, we need to prioritize based on where can we do stuff in a relatively short time frame that will add value. I think all of us are absolutely focused on improving the interface because of all of the issues that we've had. A lot of that is about really getting into understanding why people are coming to our hospitals in the first place. And one of the things I'm very keen to do is to utilize the data that we have much more effectively. So we have the best data on health and care in the country with the whole systems integrated care dashboard, but we're not using that at the moment in a way that says, what can that tell us about the people that are coming to our hospitals and why they come and how they've interacted with the health and care system before they arrive. And actually, we've got expertise in the sector. We just need to put them to it. So I think that would be a key part in helping us work out what the right community interventions are. I think more generally, there is of course, there is a program which is more national about how do you roll out things like the fuller stock take of primary care and how do we build these neighbourhood teams that will plug in more effectively. And we heard earlier from Councillor Sheff about how getting our teams out into the communities is the way to really engage them. And I think that will be a really important thing. But I think, I would be lying if I said I thought that was going to be transformative in the next 6 months. I think that is a key part of what we need to be up to in 23-24.
Thanks, Tim. I'm going to move us on now to the Collaborative People Committee and Janet.
Thank you. We've talked about the fact we're in a people business, and actually people represent over 60% of our costs. So you can imagine the People Collaborative Committee feel that they're doing a really important job, but also they've got some major challenges. And I'd like to actually congratulate the HR directors and Pippa on the work that they've been doing together before, if you like, we formed the committee. They came up with 7 people priorities, and I just want to outline them briefly. One is safe and sustainable staffing. Second is workforce redesign for new models of care. The third is maximising the use of new roles. Fourth is making it a great place to work. The fifth is ensuring HR is the most effective it can be and efficient. The sixth is what can be done in equality, diversity and inclusion. And the seventh is staff health and well-being, particularly with this cost of living crisis. Now, they identified 47 deliverables.
Which you're not going to read to us.
And a bit like what Tim has just said regarding quality, what the committee encouraged the HR directors to do was actually to narrow some of these down. And they have done that. And Pippa will say a bit more about some of these in a minute. And we've particularly encouraged them to think about how does the collaborative add value in these areas. So the first, we asked for 3 and they came up with 4, which is fine. We accepted 4. And the first one was concentrating on the hardest to fill vacancies. So for example, shouldn't they have proposed having a single overseas recruitment plan? What a good idea, as opposed to having 4 individual ones. The next one was around reducing the variation in bank and agency rates and the volume of shifts paid over agreed rates. And they've done some really good work there, because we're in the business here, aren't we, of not competing with each other, but actually collaborating. The third thing, and we've heard it mentioned a number of times already today, is they need to develop and deliver with their colleagues around this table here, the elective orthopaedic centre workforce plan. This is a key
This is a key example of how this collaborative is going to work in getting this initiative up and running. So they've been set a target to do that by January. And the final one is to really look at what can be implemented in terms of joint initiatives here to support staff well-being during the cost of living crisis. And as we know, there are a number of signposts that can be made and are being made to our staff, but there are other thoughts that they are in the process of developing. So that is some of the, if you like, the 4 priorities that they've been asked to look at. What did we receive positive assurance in? That the workforce risks are being identified across the collaborative. And we also received positive assurance that the annual workforce race equality standard and the disability equality standard data has been reviewed and approved at local people committees and would be published on, has been published on websites, and equally importantly, that there are improvement plans related to those. And they've been asked, particularly in terms of the workforce race equality standard, not to set up another committee, but actually to set up a task and finish group to develop a collaborative action plan. So at that point, I'd like to hand across to Pippa to say a bit more. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. So unlike Leslie, I was delighted that this was allocated to me, because I really do truly believe that actually if we get this agenda right, everything else will fall into place. I think the thing that we're telling us here is the HRDs either can't count or they don't follow instruction, or actually they're just ambitious and passionate. And I think that's exactly it. So the 7 priorities are really starting to inform what a people plan for the Acute Collaborative will look like. And we will work through that in the background. But what we absolutely know is we need to do something more immediate. You know, when we look, and you'll have seen the data there, we do have an increase in vacancy rate, we do have an increase in turnover rate, voluntary, and we do have an increase in sickness rate because of the waves of COVID. So we absolutely need to do some immediates to try and stabilise that position so we can actually get into a more of a, what does the futuristic workforce start to look like? So them immediates, as Janet has pointed out, is, you know, we've got, you could argue an 11.4 vacancy rate across the system actually isn't that alarming, but that's not a standard 11.4 vacancy rate. In some areas it's much higher, in some areas it's much lower. And some of our hard to recruit areas, that is a real challenge for us. So it absolutely cries out for what can we do differently together? What can we do better together? How can we recruit differently together? And that's certainly something that the HRDs are really tackling together. Of some of, we had a great example back in the summer. We did a healthcare assistant recruitment day for the whole of Northwest London. We recruited hundreds of healthcare assistants that actually were local employees into the NHS. So how can we do more of that together in some of these hard to recruit to roles? The standardising bank and agency rates and locum rates for medical staffing is something we really need to tackle. We're almost there with that. The HRDs have beavered away, and we've got a paper coming to chief executives today for approval. So we can have one standardised pay rate for people that are working bank and agency within our organisations. That would go a long way actually to stop people competing. We have to stop being competing organisations. We have to start sharing a workforce and seeing our North West London workforce as our North West London workforce. So I think we'll have completed that piece of work with a little bit more to do around the medical agency rates in the next few weeks and months. The elective orthopaedic centre, it's a really exciting model actually. It's one of the first of many. So we have got a number of things to unpick to get us to the right place, but this is for the first time where we'll have a workforce that are mobile across North West London, as our patients will be mobile across North West London. So we need to think about different models and ways of doing that. And the wellbeing offer and the financial challenge that our staff are under at the moment, we absolutely need to come together so we can make sure we've got an appropriate response to that. I think, as Janet says, it's actually really hard. I'm on the HRD's page here. It's hard to pin down 3 because you could argue the res agenda, the inclusion agenda should be right at the top. But I think actually what we all felt as a committee, it should be weaved through all of this. It absolutely is key and fundamental to everything we do. So rather than having it stand alone, we absolutely need to make sure, and I challenge you all to challenge us if we're not, it needs to be included in everything that we're delivering as part of the people agenda. The whole diversity inclusion agenda needs to be central to it. So that's it.
Thank you. Question, Steve.
Yeah, in terms of the immediate actions, one of the other things that jumps out from the paper, and it does link into retention, is none of the trusts are on track to deliver against the target for performance reviews. What are the actions? Well, can you comment on what the actions are to address that? Because clearly that's not an acceptable position for us as an organisation to be in.
Yeah, so we absolutely recognise it's not acceptable. It's where do we add additional value as an acute collaborative? So I feel that's my responsibility as a chief exec for my organisation to ensure every one of my staff has had a meaningful PDR. That will be the case for all 4 of us as chief execs. As an acute collaborative coming together, could we add value? Probably not. So I think there are some things we've got to say. This is for the organisations to deliver. This is where we can come together to deliver better together. Kevin might want to come in.
Great. Last question, Sim. Oh,
sorry. I was just going to, I think, Steve, as well, one of the things that we all did and were instructed to do as well nationally is have the conversations with staff about their health and well-being. So I think the priority during COVID and coming out of COVID was to really make sure that people were having those health and well-being conversations, and almost because people have been redeployed or moved, the actual standard PDR type conversation was not almost relevant. So I think that some of the data might also reflect the fact that we shifted away from that standard approach during those days, but absolutely committed to get it back to the, you know, the levels that they were pre-COVID.
Thank you, Matthew. Pippa, you sort of answered my question. I was going to ask about EDI, and you said it. It's a thread that runs through all of the work that we do. And of course, the People Committee, the Collaborative People Committee, is the guardian of that work, but it's incumbent upon every single person in this room and throughout the organisation to carry the weight of the EDI agenda. You know, this is not just about the People Committee. This is about every single one of us standing up and being accountable for not accepting certain behaviours in our institutions. So I just wanted to say that. So yes, we will be the guardian and we will be the champion, and this committee will set the tone. But I'm expecting that everyone takes accountability for this EDI agenda, from audit through to finance. It's incumbent upon all of us to create a culture where people feel included and want to work for us. It's all part of our retention strategy. It's all part of our recruitment strategy. So it's a thread that runs and binds us all. So I just wanted to say that, Matthew.
Thank you. I won't invite a response because I don't think Pippa will be more eloquent than you were. So, moving on to the infrastructure committee. Can I come to you, Bob?
Sorry, I don't normally need a microphone. The key differential about the Infrastructure and Capital Committee, of course, is it's not a natural aggregate of local committee working. Let me say what we agreed in our first meeting that we wouldn't be. Right? We don't want to be a committee that finds something to do to get in the way of local redevelopment activity already in train. But neither do we want it to be a very interesting discursive forum where we have thoroughly good chats about stuff and then go away again. So I think we you know, the paper makes very clear we want to try and challenge the collaborative to come up with envelope pushing opportunity, I suppose, that gives benefit at the collaborative level, both from a service improvement perspective and a pounds improvement perspective. And once those options are identified and whatever decision-making forum makes the appropriate decision, then we want to be able to push that through with pace. And I think that becomes increasingly important as we identify opportunities to maximise a state infrastructure potential across our four. And Leslie already mentioned the elective orthopaedic centre. We know about community diagnostic centre development, but it won't stop there. And I think it's also as we coalesce around an increasingly common digital infrastructure, then there's bound to be opportunities to maximise service, patient benefit, and pound sign improvement. And then lastly, as we embark on more programs in an infrastructure space which are inherently collaborative, or we see local infrastructure programs that might well have impacts on other collaborative partners. And it just strikes me that there's going to be a necessity for an assurance and oversight function, which frankly doesn't clog up the business of other committees. And one might expect a point of time at which and it just strikes me that there's going to be a necessity for an assurance and oversight function, which frankly doesn't clog up the business of other committees. And one might expect a point of time at which when prioritised business cases are being put before, for instance, the Collaborative Finance Committee, and that'll be the thing that, and then that will play back into Aman's comment right at the very start about developing a master plan where relevant for the level of infrastructure that's associated with the collaborative.
Perfect, thanks, Bob. Tricia, was there anything you wanted to add?
I just really wanted to say something very briefly about the digital piece, because I think it's very important. So across Northwest London, we are actually very well advanced in terms of digital strategy development, use of digital across the piece. And we have an evolving ICS strategy, which has 7 components to it. And in fact, I was at a meeting yesterday with the ICS where we were discussing exactly that, about how we develop that and expand it. What you have in this paper here is just an outline of how we need to take parts of that strategy and create the Northwest London Acute Collaborative Strategy, which will be an embedded part of that. And really to pull out that from the work that's been done, there are really a set of things that we want to prioritise, which are about improving patient and clinician experience, about providing better tools to manage flow, and rationalising, increasing the resilience of our IT infrastructure. Those are really our key priorities. And as part of that, we've got a number of key priorities across Northwest London. The first is that we have Cerner as our patient platform across all 4 trusts. So currently Imperial and Chelsea have the Cerner platform, and by the end of the next calendar year, so 2023, both London Northwest and Hillingdon will be on Cerner. And it's a very innovative programme of work across Northwest London, because we will have what's known as a single instance of Cerner, which means our ability to share information across the 4 trusts will be facilitated. And in fact, Cerner are very excited about working with us as a collaborative. We'll be one of the biggest organisations in the UK and worldwide, in fact, who are using a single instance of the Cerner platform. So that's a really exciting and incredibly important piece of work, and I think will facilitate patient flow, but will also over time facilitate the standardisation of clinical practice across the 4 organisations, which I think is a really innovative piece of work going forward. We're doing a piece of work based on the Foundry platform, which was used nationally during COVID around COVID vaccination particularly. And that is about how we get to single patient waiting lists, how we use programs like that to help us with monitoring our performance. And some of the work that we've done for the performance report is based on using single platforms of data that allows us to compare data on performance, flow, and particularly process measures. So again, some really exciting work there. And very importantly, in what we have as a digital world is the fact that we're doing a lot of work around cybersecurity and making sure that our platforms are we're using the most recent version of our platforms and that we have good cybersecurity in place so that we're not subject to downtime or cyber attacks. And that's incredibly important. So it's a really exciting piece of work. And I believe that within the next 12 months or so, we'll start to see that really helping us look at how we improve patient care, how we drive our performance through the organisations, and how we start to use that much more as well to get good feedback from patients about how we can deliver care in a different way.
Capital infrastructure on many occasions through this board. So I am now going to move us on to talk about the winter plan, which I think Leslie's going to introduce and then Claire's going to talk about.
Claire, over to you.
Thank you. I think we've actually covered quite a lot of what I was going to say in terms of the plan already, in terms of the context that we're working in and some of the challenges and risks that we're facing. So there's probably only really two things I would say on top in case anybody, and then obviously happy to answer any questions. So one is it's a short paper that's not reflective of the amount of work that's actually gone into putting the plan together. And we've done that individually, collectively within our collaborative and then across the ICS. The two key take homes for me though are one is demand is quite unpredictable, so it is hard to know what's going to happen, but our best guess based on kind of what we know now and planning in order to be able to keep our activity going at the same time is that collectively we've created enough bed capacity to be able to manage through the winter between us. The key caveat within that though is that that bed capacity won't necessarily be in the same place that the demand arises, so there will be hotspots and we're going to have to work together really closely to be able to manage those. Other than that, we've articulated all of the risks around urgent and emergency care and the quality issues, and so I'm happy just to take any questions.
Nick.
I had one question, the risk that's not identified, and I was trying to decide where to raise this and whether it was under people or here. And just a contextual risk is what planning or contingency planning is going on and what discussions are going to have to consider the likelihood of industrial action this winter. Because it's in the news yesterday, it seems very likely there's very unlikely to be a change of government policy in relation to adding any more money into the wages pot. So clearly that is going to have an impact, and I think we should be made aware of what we're considering on it.
Pippa.
I'll do a Leslie and hand over to the HRDs.
Yeah, so the HRDs have been working together across not just the Acute Collaborative, but across the ICS. And yeah, we're keeping a close eye on the TUC conference as it starts today, because we do expect general strike call unless something changes. And we have started to discuss that at Gold. So we've got a plan going to this week's Gold based on any outcomes from the TUC conference so that we can put it in that context.
Describe Gold for us for the benefit of our audience. Describe what Gold is for the benefit of our audience.
Every week, senior group of leaders across the system get together, the COOs, medical directors and the ICS medical director chairs it. And so we are looking at the workforce plan this Friday. We've got a number of, without going into too much detail, we've got a number of common approaches in terms of how we maximise staff availability that we used in COVID. So try and align, when do we stop annual leave, when do we stop people going on training, to try and make sure we avoid one trust having people on non-mandatory training while another trust has got their finance department feeding patients. And so there's a plan that we developed that we'll be talking about on Friday at Gold. But it could obviously blow everything out of the water.
Thank you. Peter.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Claire. I thought it was an excellent piece of work. I wondered if you could unpack a couple of things. You used the expression manage through the winter under the most likely scenario. Could you describe what manage through the winter means in terms of patient experience, patient metrics? And what is the most likely scenario? Like, what is not in it? And what type of shocks in terms of COVID surges, unusually cold winters, gas supply cut-offs, etc., would knock you off managing?
Thank you. Yes, I'll take your second question first. So in terms of the forecast demand and capacity planning, we've actually done it in two ways. So we've received some guidance from NHSE about what we should plan for, which talks about a 5% increase in demand. It talks about COVID levels staying stable, and it then gives us a kind of idea of how much bed capacity we need. Individually, our organisations have also done some demand and capacity analysis, looking at demand as it is at the moment and how it normally changes over the winter period and what would happen if we get the normal sort of step up in activity. And broadly speaking, those numbers all come out round about the same. So I'm happy that it's quite a sort of best reasonable assessment of where we are in terms of our predictions. You're quite right, though. There are a number of big things that could potentially influence that. So our COVID levels at the moment are ever present but stable. Any form of kind of increase in that would seriously, I think, change our ability to be able to cope. Similarly, any major changes in acuity or other outbreaks in infectious diseases would, or any changes just in terms of numbers of presentations through the front door. So any kind of unusual patterns of behaviour. Then in terms of measures of success, NHSE actually, I think, have been really helpful in the metrics they've put forward in terms of how they're going to judge our success over winter. And so from an acute trust perspective, it's around ambulance handover delays, bed occupancy, and patients, percentage of patients in hospital who don't need to be there or who ready to move on to the next part of their care. And our plan at the moment is, with the increased pressures, with the demand we're expecting, to hold those things steady, recognising our current performance at the moment and where that is relative to everybody else, to keep that steady through the pressurised period. And that will then help us in terms of being able to manage safety through our emergency departments and then flow more broadly through our hospitals. Does that answer your question?
You know, I can see the metrics that are quoted in the paper. What I was interested in is those patient experience metrics. I understand ambulance handover obviously is. The others really aren't. I mean, they're indirect. But in terms of waiting times, knock on waiting times in A&E, knock-on effects on the PTL, etc.
You want me to give it a go?
Go on, Leslie.
Oh, 2 seconds, literally 2 seconds.
2 seconds.
So one is actually there may well be an impact on any, and it's really why we try and concentrate on that and ambulance handover, the most sickest, and then actually being very clear and transparent, which is the best thing we can do. In terms of PTL, I think I said earlier, it's why there's this real drive for the 85% of into day cases and the theatre utilisation. But you're right, it may well have an impact, but we're doing everything we can to try and mitigate that. Don't know if that's 2 seconds, sorry.
That's helpful, Leslie. Thank you. I'd say I used to be a chief operating officer, and no one asked me to plan winter against the variables of a general strike, a recurrence of a pandemic, and the gas being turned off. So I think these are an unusual moment, and thanks to the team working on that. I do think it's probably worth saying, as we have an audience here, that part of how the NHS manages this is by the vaccination programs being really successful, and people need to get their COVID vaccination, they need to get their flu vaccination, and a message I think is missing at the moment is, if you have not had a COVID vaccination ever, you haven't missed the boat. We need you to come and now join the gang and become vaccinated. It is one of the medical miracles of the 21st century. I remember Tim telling me several weeks ago that it was a while since we'd had any COVID patients in his intensive care unit that had a vaccination. It was becoming a mortal disease of the unvaccinated. So even if you think you've missed out on your first 3 or 4 chances, now will be a good time to join the gang. And I think if that message is delivered, that will help enormously with what we find turning up in A&E departments, and particularly what ends up in our intensive care units across the winter. Thank you very much. Thank you for that, Claire. And we're all with you. Right, just slightly behind. Okay, I'm going to move on to the reports from the Trust Audit Committees. If I could ask the audit chairs not to run through their reports, but to just highlight anything that we need to bring to attention. We have them in writing, and I turn first of all to Neville and the Hillingdon Audit Committee.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so I'll take the paper as read. There's just 3 points I'll bring out. First of all, the very good performance on the Better Payments Practice Code. This is the speed with which the trust pays its suppliers, and the faster they pay the suppliers, the better it is. And that the amount outstanding has moved down from 19 million to 5 million. That's a considerable achievement. The next thing is that we received positive assurance on progress through closing the internal audit actions and also progress through the current internal audit plan. And I think the third thing to bring out is in our general discussion, there was a recognition that governance of risk is going to be something that will occupy audit committees increasingly for reasons that we've spoken about all morning. And I think part of that governance of risk is the point that I think Tim mentioned earlier. It's ensuring that priorities are generated. So that's going to feature increasingly in the Hillingdon audit, and I think throughout all other audit committees as well. So those are the 3 points I wanted to bring out. I do have a delegated authority ask, if I could lob that in now. That's simply to say that the Hillingdon's charity accounts are usually approved by the Trust Board, but changes and timetabling means that will not now be possible. So I'm requesting delegated authority from this board in common to the Hillingdon Audit and Risk Committee for that approval to be done by the Audit Committee at Hillingdon. And the timetable would be that the Charitable Funds Committee would approve it on 14th of October, the Hillingdon Audit and Risk Committee on the 28th of November, and submission would be by the 30th of November.
In an elegant piece of governance here, this is a decision for non-executive and executive members from Hillingdon.
Yep.
As it is a delegation from the Hillingdon board who's sitting in here. So does anybody who is a Hillingdon board member have an objection to that delegated responsibility? Excellent, granted. Thank you for asking.
Great example.
Really good example. Yes, let's do easy ones in the future. That's very good. Okay, moving on to Aman.
Thank you. Well, I've yet to chair an audit committee and I'll still next thunder. I'll take the report as read. The only item I want to mention is the external audit, where on financial sustainability, governance and improving economy, there were no significant weaknesses at all, and we had a good report. That's all, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bob, Imperial.
Thank you, Chair. I hope the update report is fairly explanatory. There are 3 things I would like to bring out, because actually a couple of them I think relate to some of our earlier conversations about collaborative learning. So I would bring out the very, very good piece of work that I attended and supported, which was the lessons learned piece of work that went on between Imperial's finance team and Deloitte, which actually was very successful, and there could well be some helpful learning for other finance functions in the gang as to how to maximise or minimise issues at year end and maximise a stress-free life for finance staff. Audit and Risk Committee at Imperial for a while has concentrated quite a lot on cyber risk. And in the context of the infrastructure conversation we've just had, notwithstanding the huge alignment that goes on, it could well be that there's some natural learning across the other audit committees coming out of that. And I'm sure Nick in his new role will be happy to take that on. And then finally, an assurance specifically for Imperial board members to note was the fire safety assurance that we got, in relation to the Western Eye issue, but actually fire safety and compliance across the organisation gave a level of assurance. And again, in the context of infrastructure committee, there may be some learning for other organisations there. I don't know, but they struck me as being three things that were worth bringing out from a collaborative perspective. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Bob. And thank you for stepping in to chair that meeting before we had a Ned to chair the audit committee, which we now have with Nick joining the Imperial Board. So very, very good. And lastly, Vinetta.
Thank you, Chair. Again, we haven't had our first audit committee as me as audit chair, which is now on 26th. So that we are correct because we had some members missing. I'll take the report as read. Generally, no risk to escalate. The concerns outstanding, you would see we have actually addressed a whole lot of that this morning through Peter and David's papers. There is, of course, the proof of the pudding would be when things come like CQC, how do we actually work that out, become more clearer in terms of audit committee as such. I have, received a report on quality assurance of our external audits, which has been very good and a useful way to issue in, and all things are in order. Jonathan and I have had a review and worked out what needs to be done on that. Specifically, just continuing in what was raised by Neville is, again, I need delegation of authority to the audit committee for the charitable funds to be report to be received and signed off, accounts to be received and signed off after they've come to the charitable funds committee. So our timeline is they will come to the December audit committee for this to be signed off for 31st of January.
Excellent. So this is the question for London North West board members. Are there any objections to that delegated responsibility? I see no joy around the table. So excellent. Thank you for that. So that's agreed. And if I can ask the board to note those reports from the audit committees. Thank you very much indeed. With no any other business advised in advance, is there anything that anybody needs to raise? I think, given the number of opinions in the room, landing 4 minutes late on
So that's impressive.
It's the I got Steve sitting next to me going, "You're running late. You're running late."
Only 3 minutes.
Very good, excellent. So we will now take this opportunity to move to questions from the public. So I'm very delighted to welcome members of our community. We have had this meeting online in order that as many people could join as possible, and I have noticed that at points we've had in excess of 50 people have joined the meeting. So we are very delighted to have had you with us, and I hope you enjoyed it. I've had a number of questions that have come in writing, so thank you very much for that. And I will deal with those first. We've had 2 or 3 questions that are similar along the lines of are the individual trusts still having their own board meetings? Is this the one board meeting? How are we going to handle stakeholder engagement? How are we going to make sure that the public still has a voice? And so I thought I should pick that up first. So the answer to the question, which was in the consultation papers that we took through all 4 public board meetings and the 2 councils of governors and the ICS and the regional health authority, and we picked this question up a number of times, is no, this is now the board of the 4 organisations. We have a NED representation and an executive representation in here, which, as you saw towards the end when we were delegating responsibility, is we have the right people in the room to both take decisions on behalf of the whole of the collaborative and on behalf of individual organisations. This is now the board meeting. There will continue to be individual annual general meetings at each of the trusts, and we will also use those meetings to renew delegated responsibility from the individual trusts to this committee. That said, we have, as I said when we were doing the consultation and the approval of the creation of this, we are very cognizant that the opportunity to ask questions for the public needs to not be denuded. To say, I'm not that convinced that 10 minutes tacked on the end of a board meeting is the most fantastic way of doing it anyway, from the point of view of the public. So we will be putting in place a series of, for want of a better phrase, of town halls, opportunities for me, some of the non-executives and some of the executives to take questions from the public and actually have long enough to have a proper dialogue about issues. We will do the first one. You just heard the winter report, so I've had a plea that we don't do the first one until we get to the other side of the new year. So probably in February we will do our first board in common town hall, and then after that we're working on how to do it, but a mixture of all 4 trusts and locality based town halls, which will give a better opportunity for an engagement between the sort of people that join these meetings and the executives and the non-executives around things than trying to fit things into the last 10 minutes of the meeting. So I hope that helps. There was one other question for me, which from Robin, which asked 2 questions. One was, I said in my report that we were beginning to see the first evidence after 6 months of the collaborative working together making a difference. What was that evidence? So I talked a bit about ambulance handover times, and I think the thing that will have come out in this meeting very clearly is that there's 2 things going on at the same time. One is the whole of the NHS in England is under enormous pressure, and we are under enormous pressure, and the access times into our services are not where we would want them to be, are not where they were 10 years ago. And our focus is on getting back to that where we were a decade ago, where we had an almost eliminated waiting, and it doesn't feel like that. If you're trying to get into outpatients or diagnostics or A&E, people are waiting longer than we would want them to do. That said, as Leslie said, the performance of North West London is the best in London at the moment on some important metrics and amongst the best in the country. And I would put up the second example I would use is the one about how quickly have we returned to our pre-COVID activity levels. And early on in this financial year, across the 5 sectors in North West London, we sat 3rd, and now we sit top in terms of our return to our pre-COVID activity levels. And the most recent information that I have is that we are at 100.3% of our pre-COVID activities across the collaborative, which means that we are now back to where we were before COVID, and 2 sectors in London have achieved that so far, and that's been an enormous journey. Now, our challenge is to get to significantly more activity that we were doing before COVID, because you remember before COVID, waiting lists and waiting times were going up. So we need to do more than that to stabilize it. And then we have a whole backlog that we need to deal with. So that's not a sense of complacency. It is a set message that between us, we are beginning to accelerate the performance across North West London, thanks to the work of staff and many of the people in the room. So I think we have some good evidence to support the green shoots are coming through. I think it is too early to declare victory. We have a number of other questions which I'm going to distribute to my friends around the table. We have a question around maternity vacancies. Do you have the numbers in front of you, Pippa?
Oh, off the top of my head, no, but I provided them yesterday, so read them out. They're pretty much standard. So Imperial 15, Chelsea 16, London North West 19, Hillingdon 20. They clearly
Okay, you do have them in front of you, or you have a photographic memory.
Leslie just produced them.
Very good.
This is collaborative working.
Very good. Excellent. Yes. So midwifery vacancy rates between 15 and 20%. That is clearly a high vacancy rate, and it reflects the pressure that our midwifery staff are under. But so that was the answer to that question. We have a question from Jim Greeley, Hammersmith, about diagnostic weights. Tim, are you lined up to pick up that question? Question 7 on my pack.
No, I'm not, but I'm happy to take it. So there's an issue about paediatric audiology, isn't there? Which
Yes.
which is an issue around community paediatric audiology services. So they were decommissioned in the community, and that then has resulted in a large number of referrals coming to primarily the Imperial Paediatric Audiology Department. So what we are currently doing is working with commissioners to work out how we can commission a service that will allow us to take some of the pressure off the ICHT service, whilst also putting on as many additional sessions as we can to soak up some of the additional demand. Claire, I don't know whether I've covered all of the details, or there's something I should like to add.
Yes, the only other bit I would add is I think part of the question is about prioritisation of those patients who are waiting. So we've got a really robust clinical harm and prioritisation process, which means that although we have a very long waiting list and some patients do need to wait longer, we're absolutely assured that those who need their treatment urgently are getting it, and we're treating them in clinical priority order.
Very good. Thank you. And then I have a question from Tony, which I'll read out because I know at the moment he is in Florida. He is the lead governor for Hillingdon Hospital, which says, whilst I support the establishment of the proposed orthopaedic centre at the Central Middlesex, I am extremely concerned about the locations, poor access to public transport from all parts of Hillingdon. What steps will be taken to improve access to the site from Hillingdon? Do you want to pick that up, Pippa, as you own the site?
Yeah, so we have done our initial look at travel times from all of our sites. Actually, it's not just our hospitals, it's from all of our boroughs that we cover, and hence why our sort of preliminary information does tell us that the right site is at Central Middlesex. So clearly, wherever we place this site, it is a hub site. There will be difficult travel times for some individuals, and that's why it's really important we hear from you all during the public consultation, because actually this is the public's opportunity to really inform how we do implement this well, and we want to do that in partnership with the public. So I'd really encourage you all to come forward and the members of the public to come forward and give their views to the consultation, so we can try and address the challenges that we know are unique to particular parts of our population.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think we are, so the consultation is important, but we're also very cognizant that that we have to get a balance right here between the optimal way to deliver a service. How do we get the most operations done of the highest quality as quickly as possible, and the need to be able to travel to those facilities? So the model of care will leave as much as possible in the local hospital in terms of outpatients and diagnostics, with you only needing travel for your operation. And then we will need to make sure it is possible for people to get to the services.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the pre-operation and the post-operation part of the pathway, which is actually the majority of the attendance, is done in a local hospital. So it is one attendance at the hub site to have an operation. The rest will be done at local hospitals, which would minimise the disruption and the travel disruption for people.
And I have one more question that's come through on the chat from Ian Bendel, which it says, will there be an opportunity for Hillingdon governors to interact with Hillingdon NEDs on local issues, which we could equally have come from the governors at Chelsea Westminster? To which the answer is, of course, yes. We are continuing to have Council of Governors meetings. They will be attended by non-executives as well as executives to talk about the issues that are covered by the membership for the Foundation Trust. The conversation that we are now beginning to have is, well, how do we replicate that kind of relationship for the non-foundation trusts? I don't see a strong logic in us having one model for foundation trusts and one for other parts of the population. And when we look at the way in which London North West engage with its population, it has a very specific and very successful way it does that. If we look at the way in which Imperial does it through its strategic lay members, approach. It's also very successful. There is the best of each of those bits that we need to bring together, recognising the statutory accountability of a council of governors, but the need to be able to engage well with local communities applies to the whole of our population and not just to foundation trusts, and indeed doesn't only happen in foundation trusts. Robin Sharp, please.
Oh, hello. Sorry, I didn't know you were calling me. Well, I just wanted to make sure a patient voice was actually heard in the meeting. You did partly answer my question, but on behalf of patients, since this is your first meeting in public, as I understand it, I'd like to welcome the board. And obviously, we would like to see greater participation and collaboration, but we do wish you well in your incredibly important task. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And Harjinder?
Yes, I am the public governor at Hillingdon Hospital. I've been listening to all the various talks by the experts, and I heard that there was a mention about the patient care in terms of when they come in for their treatment up to when they are discharged. Earlier this week, last week, I was involved with the place quality control going around the Hillingdon Hospital. I think one major point is being missed here, and I think it's very imperative that a collaboration should be needed for the patient's dietary needs. I came across one patient who was from the Jain community. He's been in and out of the hospital, and every time he addresses his needs for the dietary needs, they are not addressed. What his needs for the diet are not being supplied to him. He doesn't eat what he's provided with because that's not compatible or is not what he wants as far as his dietary needs go. Unfortunately, he has to get food from home. So I am a little bit concerned. This one particular patient I came across, I wonder how many others are there who are perhaps not even aware that they can ask for their appropriate dietary needs. This is very, very important.
So, Harjinder, thank you very much. It's an important question. I'm going to let not only the Chief Nursing Officer at Hillingdon pick it up, but also thank you for doing those visits and for your ongoing contribution through the Council of Governors.
Thank you very much for raising that. Just to really feedback, there's quite an extensive menu that's available in the trust for many groups and lots of diverse needs. I think that, and it's monitored quite regularly as well. So we'll take that back. I can certainly look at that, but I know that that offer is available, and maybe we need to look at how we make that more understandable and available for patients to see. But I certainly know that the choice is definitely there. So I will take that away. Thank you. I think it's just one more query.
Thank you. I'm going to, Harjinder, can I suggest that you pick it up directly with Melanie now and talk about the specific patients? That's useful. So I'd like to take these last two questions before closing the meeting. So Jim Greeley, we have picked up one of your questions. Do you have another?
I've got the same question. Hello, Chair. Thank you for recognising me. I sent in a question which has got a number of clauses, and in practice, none of them have been answered. And they come from an educational background. I worked in education about the effects on young people, about not being seen often enough, and lack of follow through on time. And I know how educational attainment and socialization is affected by not being able to be seen within a short 6 weeks period of time. The answer was not specific, but my question was quite specific based on knowledge.
I've seen that question. I didn't get through to us. Could you send us the question again and we will respond to you in writing? I don't think that question, Jim. I did have other questions.
It's the paediatric audiology question.
Oh, you see the
Yes.
paediatric.
So I think they're reasonable questions, Jim. The answer here, of course, is that The issue is here is an issue of commissioning, and we don't run the paediatric audiology service in the community, but that was the service that was decommissioned. So what we are trying to do is to have a discussion with the commissioners, who actually should be the people who are expert enough to answer all of those perfectly reasonable questions, in order to get a service that is fit for purpose up and running. I think we are doing what we can do in terms of the paediatric audiology service, which is to try and put on as many additional sessions as we can to try and deal with the demand. But at the moment, I completely accept the fact that we are not doing as much as we would like or should. But I'm very happy to take that offline with you and to give you a more detailed answer.
And perhaps we forward this question through to the ICS as well, so they can pick it up as well. Thank you. My apologies for that, Jim. I missed the second half of that question. Last question for you, Eve.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, I sent in a question probably a little bit too late, and I don't really expect much of an answer now, but my actual question was on the recently published NHS England operating framework. I think it's a bit of a big question, so if I could just flag my question up, I would appreciate a written reply. It was really about the sort of rating. I believe that the CEO for Hillingdon did mention that there are 2 trusts, one has been rated as 3, which is my own, London North West, and Hillingdon, which is 4. I don't know how that rating is going to change under the current rules, but one of the things that was noted was that the oversight would be done by 2 separate bodies.
Question and respond. Sorry, Eve, you're breaking up a bit. Let's pick up your question and we'll respond to you in writing.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right, thank you very much. I'm going to close the meeting there. Thank you.